Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Seiler, and welcome back to Life, the Universe, and Bowling. Today, we're going to talk about surface maintenance. It's an interesting topic. Working in a pro shop for many years, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about it. I've had people ask me questions while I'm on the lanes about, why I did something with surface or why I didn't do something with surface. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes, maybe 15 here, talking about surface maintenance and how to keep your bowling balls performing at their best, because they're very expensive, time consuming to get the right pieces in your bag, and everybody wants to make them last as long as possible. So how does surface affect the ball roll? How often should I maintain my surfaces, and what surface should I use in what conditions? Well, there's lots of topics to cover, but simply stated, more surface texture, a duller ball, creates more traction in oil and somewhat less in drier parts of the lane. Less surface texture, shinier ball, creates more skid in oil and more traction in drier parts of the lane. While it's generally true that duller balls hook more than shiny balls, that's not always the case. What is dull and what is shiny by my definition? Well, we'll cover that a little bit later. But on higher ratio patterns, recreational patterns, house patterns, Great Wall of China, whatever you want to call it, there's usually a big puddle in the center of the lane, and the gutter pretty much throws sparks. So even shiny, weak bowling balls can have a large, violent direction change if they're thrown into the friction. This is one of the things that I hate about ball reviews, is everybody reviews bowling balls on house patterns that have a bunch of ratio. If you throw it one or two boards more right, as a right-hander, even weak bowling balls are going to hook. If you miss a little bit left, even strong bowling balls are going to push. Depending on how cliffed they are, that can be pretty extreme, right? So just understand when you're looking at bowling videos online that there's a lot of good intention behind them. I'm not picking on anyone that makes ball reviews. I used to back in the day, 20 years ago. But what I'm saying is that if they're doing this on a house pattern, be very careful about when you see ball comparisons, and you have to pay extremely close attention to how that bowler released it, ball speed, slight changes in direction, launch angle, all that sort of stuff. I digress. That's not so much about surface. But back to surface. Even weak bowling balls have a violent direction change when they're thrown directly into the friction. That can mean weak by weak core. That can mean weak by weak cover preparation, shiny ball. Duller balls can oftentimes spend energy before reaching the drier parts of the lane and appear to be tired when they get off the friction. So just because you see a ball not hook on a house pattern doesn't mean that it's a weaker bowling ball. It could be that it's stronger and it was spending energy earlier in the pattern, hit the dry harder, blew up, went forward, lost energy, etc. I've seen many times that bowlers start with a benchmark type of ball and start to experience some transition after a game or so. The back ends tighten up, so the bowler grabs a bigger ball to create more motion and stay in the same part of the lane. The problem is they stayed in the same part of the lane. Part of that transition might have been they were removing oil from the front, right? Because the fronts have been depleted, the ball stores or spends energy early, and often without really showing hook. When it gets to the break point, there simply isn't enough rotational energy left for the desired motion to be created. This is more often seen with asymmetrics than symmetric, but it can happen with both, and it can happen with shiny and dull surfaces, although more often with dull. My recommendation is to have a plan before you start of what type of bowling ball you're going to use, and when it starts to not work, what do you go to? Have a ball that you start with, have a slightly smoother ball, smoother, less surface, and possibly a more angular counterpart that you can pull out when the lanes begin to transition. More angular means usually a later, flippier drill and maybe even smoother surface than the one before. You almost never want to ball up when you see transition, especially when you're talking about surface. Sometimes you want to core up a little bit, because the carry down or the transition in the lane can cause the ball to get tired or not pick up quite as quickly. But you very rarely ever want to throw a stronger surface after you start. So what's a good starting surface? For me, A good answer would be it depends. It depends on the bowling surface. What are we bowling on? Is it wood? Is it HPL? Is it SPL or Brunswick? How old is the synthetic? How old is the wood? What is the oil pattern? What conditioner are they using? Do they strip properly? Are they over diluting the stripping solution? What bowling ball is it? What's the rev rate? Are you matched up or speed dominant, rev dominant? Thousands and thousands and thousands of variables. For me, and this is just a starting point for me, if everything is the same, I like to start with something around 3,000 grit on a medium to high flaring, symmetric, solid, if I can. Why is that? Because that surface is blendy enough to not show me a lot of over-under. It's dull enough to pick up in the pattern and allow me to play some angle in the front to use the ratio that's there. And symmetrics give me a longer usable window than ASIMs. What is a usable window? A usable window or window of usability, it just means how long you're going to be in that bowling ball. Typically for me, if I start with an asymmetric, they tend to see the transition quicker. They tend to see the front burn a little quicker. They tend to see the push down lane a little quicker. So symmetric balls give me a longer window of opportunity to use them. More importantly, starting with a benchmark solid symmetric with about 3,000 on it gives me more options as the lane starts transition. If the transition shows me wrap 10s, meaning the pattern's probably stretching, I can go to a similarly surfaced hybrid or pearl, maybe even an ASIM to go around the pattern just a little bit more. Typically moving my feet a bit left and my eyes a bit right, or keeping them the same, so you're increasing your launch angle without substantially changing my angles, or my zone of play, or my speed or rotation. I don't want to make big moves if I can avoid it. I kind of want to see the same shape. If I start seeing 4-pin types of reactions, early hook, I can either make a larger move to get in front of the pattern, meaning I might have gotten behind it a little bit, might have gotten lazy, and stay with the piece that I have, or maybe I make a parallel move left and switch to something smoother or weaker to hold pocket. Hard to tell. If they're super cliffed, you might make a parallel move left and have the ball up to a bigger core to get forward quicker to get the 10 pins out. It's always hard to tell. But if you have a plan when you start out, you will much more clearly see when the options are working in front of you and when they're not working in front of you. Maybe you have to go to plan B, right? One of the most optimal situations that you can have in bowling is when you have a little bit of hook to the right of your target, to the outside of your target. Again, I'm right-handed. If I say right, I mean outside for righties. If you're more speed dominant, we talk about surfaces, a good starting place might be 1,000 or 2,000 grit. That's a little too much for me, but I'm getting older. My speed has dropped off a little bit from when I was younger. My rev rate hasn't. So I'm slightly rev dominant now. And if you're more rev dominant, you're going to start with smoother surfaces or maybe even a weaker core. If you're speed dominant, you're going to start with more surface and you're going to tend to like more surface. In general, I like to tell bowlers that once you find your favorite surface, always stay within a pad or 2 pads of that. What's a pad? It's one of these things. It's a resurfacing pad. They're available in grits of 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, 1,500, 1,000, 500, 360, 240, all over the place. If I start with 3,000, my pad choices are generally going to be, unless we're bowling on something extreme, are going to be 3,000, 4,000 grit, maybe a shiny ball, maybe a 2,000 grit ball, but I doubt I'm going to throw 500 because that's 3-4 pads away from me, and that's just not my sweet spot. If you're a speed dominant guy and you like 1,000 grit, you might throw some 500 every once in a while if you hit a heavier condition or a longer pattern. You might throw some 2,000, maybe 3,000, but you're probably never going to throw 4,000 or shiny because those balls aren't going to match up to you. So understand that whatever your favorite surface is, whatever that go-to is for your benchmark ball, you're probably going to want to keep most everything in your bag within a pad or 2 of that, unless you're carrying a big bag with 8 balls and you can have an emergency ball that hooks a ton or an emergency ball that's super, super weak. You might carry those, but generally speaking, you're going to be within a pad or 2. Lose the drywall screen and the 240, 360 pads. You don't ever need them on reactives. They don't help. If you use urethane, we'll cover some of that later. Different story. But for reactives, don't put 360 or 240 on them. They don't help. For me, I carry shiny balls 3000 and 1000. Gives me a little bit of variety. In most centers, that's enough. It's rare that I throw a surface other than these unless I'm bowling on something in a lower ratio in a center that I know pretty well, right? If I know it's a slick surface and I know it's a longer pattern or a high volume, flatter ratio, I might carry something that's a little out of the box. I like to keep my choices limited. I don't want to choose from 8 different surfaces. I want to choose from 2 or 3. On high ratio stuff, I usually only take 3 or 4 balls in the center. One of those is a spare. So I'll have a shiny ball, a benchmark ball, and maybe one with a little bit more grit on it. If you can't hit it with those 3, it's just probably not your night. No need to carry 10 balls in for league. So how do I know what surface is on my ball? This is a simple one to answer. You don't. When you put it on the spinner and you hit it with one of these pads and you wet sand it, you know at that point what the ball is surfaced to. The minute you start throwing it down the lane in any center, all bets are off. It'll be close to that, but it's not going to be exactly the same. Put a certain grit on the bowling ball that you know, but also be aware that the surfaces don't stay the same. All balls duller than 4,500 grit eventually make their way up to 4,500 grit due to what we call lane shine. All balls shinier than 4,500 grit eventually make their way down to 4,500 due to what we call lane shine. This term's funny because it really has very little to do with the lane. It's another piece of misinformation or myth or whatever you want to call it. But it's really more about the ball return lift belts mostly. They have opposing pressure, and think of those almost like a buffing wheel. Every time they lift the ball to put it up in the ball return, they're rubbing against the bowling ball with fairly high speed and a little bit of pressure. And that's exactly how bowling balls are polished. So it's going to smooth that bowling ball every time it lifts it on the belt. Doesn't matter how great and new the lane surface is. Suffice it to say that with use, all bowling balls make their way toward 4,500. All balls shinier, surface down. All balls duller, surface up. Regularly resurfacing your equipment to known grits will help you ensure a predictable transition from one ball to the next. Also be aware that different bowling balls change surface at different rates. So I'm making this video in June of 2025. My experience with Storm bowling balls, SPI balls, so Storm, Rotagrip, and 900 Global, is that they smooth up very, very quickly. You can dull a ball with 2,000, and it may test at 4,000 or smoother within 3 games. Motive balls take roughly 2 to 3 times as long to drift this far in surface. I don't know what they're doing with their bowling balls right now, but they definitely hold their surface longer. And Brunswick falls somewhere in between. When I say Brunswick, I mean B7 balls. So Ebonite, Brunswick, Hammer, blah, blah, blah. Urethane bowling balls can take 20 times as long to smooth up as other bowling balls. They're very, very resistant to surface change. So you don't need to resurface your urethane bowling balls as frequently. When I see guys out there grinding on their Purple Hammer with 500 grit pad, a brand new CTD pad every single time they bowl, all they're doing is making the bowling ball smaller and wearing it out faster. Use a cleaner when you're done. Surface it with a 500 every 10 games. You're more than sufficient. With reactive balls, if you want consistent reaction from day to day, I would say touch up your surfaces. Doesn't have to be on a ball spinner, but by hand with a little bit of water and sink. Make sure you get all the grit and grime and stuff off of it. But, I would touch them up every 6 to 10 games. Obviously, the more surface you put on it, if you rely on that, if it's your means of making a living, you might want to touch those surfaces up a little bit sooner if you're throwing 500,000. But generally speaking, every 6 to 10 games is fine. Excuse me. So are there exceptions to these rules? Absolutely, urethane. If you use urethane every day, or even occasionally, you know that surface maintenance on urethane is different. A smooth urethane finish is 1,000 or 2,000 grit. More normally, urethane balls are finished at 500, 360. With urethane, the game is about getting the ball going at about 30 feet on most patterns, which is not going to happen with 1,000, 2,000 grit. It's just not. That doesn't mean you have to see it hook at 30 feet, but it has to be starting to slow down, starting to see the lane, starting to lose axis rotation by then to be effective. Personally, I don't ever use urethane at 1,000 or 2,000. I would rather use a 78D ball, which is a harder cover urethane that we use in the PBA, at 500. So maybe I start out with a Purple Hammer, which is a 73D ball at 500. And when I need a little bit less hook, I go to the Black Hammer or vice versa. Because there's a difference in the amount of hook they have, even though they're surfaced the same. More normally, I might start with a 78D ball at 500, and when it starts to transition and I have to move into the pattern a little bit because the fronts are burning, then maybe I'm throwing a 78D ball with 360 because I need more shape. Again, don't be afraid to experiment with surfaces going up and going down, because sometimes you'll find that things just work differently for you than they do for others. Also, all surfacing pads, polishes, and compounds are not created the same. Buyer beware. I will cover this in a different discussion. But CTD pads, there's a reason that here at my desk I've got a stack of them, this big. I always have new pads lying around. I tend to use them, a half a dozen times before I toss them aside. I do use some different grit polishes and compounds. Trust me, they're not all created the same. I've done a lot of testing on different stuff. So buyer beware, don't believe the marketing. Make sure you see for yourself. How does all this increase my scores? Simply stated, in normal situations, you would use more surface than normal if you need to control the pocket. Using less surface can increase your entry angle, makes your ball a little skiddier and a little flippier on many patterns, and increases your carry percentage, but it often increases the risk of bad things happening too, leaving unmakeable spares, blah, blah, blah. The easier the pattern, the less you need to worry about controlling the pattern, and the less surface you typically need. So when I see a 6, 7, 8 to 1 ratio, I'm probably going to lean on the smoother side of my surfaces, unless it's a really high volume, a really slick lane bed, or a really long pattern. Harder patterns often require that you add some surface to control the pocket, where control is better than power. More surface can be quite helpful on shorter patterns as well. Don't assume that because the pattern's shorter and there's a lot of free hook, you have to use shiny stuff. That is the wrong assumption to make. A lot of high-level bowlers use a lot of surface on short patterns and control the pocket with launch angle rather than surface. Don't be afraid to experiment. And as always, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that surface modification during competition is illegal. It's always forbidden. Doesn't matter what type of competition you're in. But it's always allowed during practice. And why do I say this? Carry a few pads with you and get used to making small tweaks when necessary to adjust your look. Do I carry 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 500, 360, all these pads with me to the foul line when I'm practicing for a tournament? No. But you can dang sure bet that when I go to practice for a tournament and I'm throwing those first few practice balls, I probably have a 1,500 in my pocket and I probably have a 3,000 in my pocket. If I have a ball that's, let's say, at 1,000 grit and I need to make it smoother, you can make it smoother really quick with a 3,000 pad. No spinner required, no water required. Just smooth it up with a 3,000. It will change the shape. Likewise, if you've got a ball at 3,000 or 4,000, like I tend to start with, and you need it to dig a little bit sooner, it's not seeing the lane until it gets out of the pattern. Throw a practice shot with it, hit it with some 1,500 by hand, throw another practice shot, hit it with 1,500 by hand. Don't be afraid to modify your surfaces right up to the start of competition. But make sure you don't modify everything in your bag. If you go to a bowling center with 3 bowling balls to bowl a tournament, what you don't want to do is stand there and practice, try to get one to hook, scuff it up with 1,500 3 or 4 times. It still doesn't hook enough. And then pull the next ball out of your bag and do the same thing to it, because you're taking options away when the lanes do transition later. Just make sure that you understand what options you have in the bag when you start modifying surfaces before the tournament starts. But anyway, in short, find your favorite surface, stay within a couple pads of it. Use a lot of surface on urethane. 360s and 500s are good there. Once you find your favorite surface, carry one of those pads in your bag and maybe, 1,000 or 1,500 to modify stuff if you need a little bit more, a little bit less. And again, experimentation is fun, helps you learn, and helps your scores increase. Till next time, hope you guys got something out of this. Enjoy.